As we said, at the center of this latest Trump campaign shuffle is the former Breitbart executive Steve Bannon. One of the more interesting nuggets from Bannon's past is that as his fee for brokering an entertainment deal several years ago, he apparently nabbed the royalties from a little heard of show, little heard of then, called Seinfeld. Wow. Obviously, we jumped at the chance to combine Seinfeld and this presidential campaign, two of the pillars of our lives to this day. So our team did a deep dive into the archives to find clips that best help us answer the question, who is Stephen Bannon?
If you want to get inside the mind of Steve Bannon, go take a tour through Breitbart.com, and it is very aggressive, very heated, often very paranoid.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
Breitbart, a far-right news source, often peddles conspiracy theories.
I'm saying that the spit could not have come from behind. That there had to have been a second spitter.
He's just the CEO. He's run several successful companies in the past.
What does he do?
He's an importer.
Just imports, no exports?
He's an importer-exporter, okay?
He does not have any experience running a campaign. How did he get this job?
We're going to find out what Bannon brings to the party.
Here's your cake.
Your wine.
See ya.
See ya.
All right. There is another side of Bannon that a lot of people are talking about today. He is the co-founder of a nonprofit called the Government Accountability Institute, which has funded, amongst other projects, the book Clinton Cash, which got a lot of attention. But as head of Breitbart, Bannon has also been an unabashed populist and often a critic of the Republican leadership, including Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, who he accuses of selling out the American people. Under his reign, Breitbart has trolled the House Speaker regularly, including during the run-up to his primary fight, including for having a fence around his home, while Ryan has refused to endorse Trump's proposal for a wall on the Mexican border. And while Bannon is new to the world of electoral politics, he is no stranger to political combat. Listen to how he was talking about the Republican Party and Washington elites back in 2013.
We don't really believe there is a functional conservative party in this country. We certainly don't think the Republican Party is that. We tend to look at this imperial city of Washington, this boomtown, as they have two groups or two parties that represent the insiders' commercial party. And that is a collection of insider deals, insider transactions, and a budding aristocracy that has made this the wealthiest city in the country.
Now, NBC News correspondent Katie Tur, who's going to join us in a bit, is reporting that Bannon today called over to the Republican National Committee and reassured them that he's not interested in turning this campaign into Trump versus the GOP establishment. Still, Donnie, if this message, which is one Trump has liked himself pre-Bannon, is one Trump takes up, running against Republicans and Republican leaders, how's that going to play?
Well, he's going to like having his two six-shooters because he's going to shoot from both ends. I do believe you take on too much, you get squashed. And now that they're taking on the media, and he's taking on Wall Street, and he's taking on Beyonce, and now he's going to take on the Republican Party, at some point, it just steamrolls over you. And it's one thing if you're running a newsletter or a website to be the flamethrower and to be kind of dropping turds on everything. I think when you're someone who is trying to get a majority vote in this country, if we go back to the two conventions, and I said after that, America was going to decide who we are. Are we the America that was portrayed in the Republican or the Democratic? And we've seen what's happening in the polls. So I think this makes for very good television, but I do not think it's going to work.
I get in the abstract what you're saying, but I believe the only chance Trump has of a serious comeback is to go against all these forces, including the party.
I agree. I don't think it's going to work, but it's his own move.
He's got to talk about the problems with the Republican Party, but he has to do it with Mike Pence and Reince Priebus and others telling the Republican establishment, don't worry, this is a bit of an act, but it's also true. There are areas where Paul Ryan would say the Republican Party in Washington's messed up. There are areas where a lot of voters, the reason I think Trump has to do this if he has a chance, is he needs to build a big coalition for change. And that's got to include some Democrats and some independents and some angry Republicans.
But the people, let's say he's trying to get a few of those Bernie voters, those 15% that are still left that haven't gone to Hillary, Why is this message resonating? It has nothing to do with any of the things
How
they
about
want.
some union guys and gals who aren't necessarily Bernie voters, but they may not vote at all, or they may be drawn to Clinton on some other issues? Don't you think that message of saying both parties in Washington have messed up? Pretty valuable party. You don't hear Hillary Clinton saying the Democratic Party's messed up.
I think, once again, I'm going to go back to those suburbs. I'm going to go back to the Reagan Democrats. I just don't see this message resonating with them.
We'll see. I think it's his best hope at this
It is his
point.
best hope. I applaud the long ball, but I don't think it's going to work.
All right, up next, more on these Trump campaign changes after this quick break.
Here to talk about the latest lineup on Team Trump is President of American Values and former Republican presidential candidate Gary Bauer. Gary, big moves today in the campaign. Let's grade it. F being disaster, A being a home run, and tell us why.
Well, I think it's a home run. I know Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon both very well. Kellyanne for more years than Steve. But I think these are two individuals that are bright. They've shown that they operate very well in American politics. And they both share, I think, the vision that Donald Trump has about mainstream America being left, Main Street America being left behind, and building a new coalition of working class people that have a bigger role in the Republican Party. So I think these announcements today, the personnel announcements, come after a week that was pretty darn good. 3 major speeches raising a lot of issues that are important, some issues that no Republican in recent history has been willing to do, and we can talk about that a little bit. But I think the campaign bottom, and it's heading in the right direction.
So, Gary, you can see that Trump is behind currently, right? Just want to make sure we agree on that, right? He's behind, right?
I think if you take a look at the overall polls, he's definitely behind.
So
I disagree with the margins.
Okay. I've known Kellyanne, as you have, for a long time, and I get what she does, and I get sort of her theory of the case. Trump would seem to me to need to expand the number of voters he's currently appealing to. How does somebody from Breitbart, which has a strong conservative following but not a lot of centrist following, how does that person help him expand his appeal to more voters?
Well, I think the one thing that Trump needs around him are people that agree with the basic vision. You know, the Republican Party has been pictured as a country club party much more interested in Wall Street than Main Street. I think a lot of the narrative is wrong, but it's a narrative the left has been using for a long time, and it's worked. So I think when a guy comes along in a populist age like Donald Trump has and says to the people that feel like the American dream is dead and says to those Republicans who are unhappy about what the party has failed to do, particularly in the last decade, that's a powerful message, and it's the right time for the message. He's got everybody in the world telling him he's got to drop it, it's wrong, it doesn't work, et cetera. To have two bright people like Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon saying, no, you're on the right track, let us help you express it more effectively and get the kind of political traction that you need to get.
Gary, you mentioned two people, and that's part of my concern for them as far as not solving the problem is they put two more chiefs in and there aren't enough Indians. I just look at the Virginia polls where he's down by 14 points, and one of the reasons is clearly, you know, Clinton's had 28 field offices. They've been down there since April. We are getting to the part of the election where micro-targeting, the ground game is kicked. That's when it kicks in. So even if you put two more flame-flame chiefs on the top, if the Indians aren't there, you're not going to fix much of the problem.
Well, look, clearly they have a lot of work to do at the grassroots level. They're running against the clock. They're going to have to step all those things up. But, Donnie, you just mentioned the Virginia poll. Let me comment on it very quickly. It's a 14-point lead, 1,000 people polled. Only 800 of them registered to vote. When they polled in that same poll likely voters, the lead shrinks to 7 or 8. And when they ask them about 4 candidates on the ticket, which there will be in Virginia, the lead goes to 6 or 7. So I think that's a very manageable gap in the middle of August for the Trump campaign to deal with. So I think a lot of these races, if you listen to the narrative, you'd think we may as well just call the election off. I think the election is going to be a lot closer than people think. And I believe he's giving signals in this last week and with these appointments that he's prepared to do the things that can make this very competitive.
Have Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell stood in the way over the last few years of the kind of changes Donald Trump wants to see?
Well, the last thing I ought to be doing is making it any more difficult for the party to come together. I think Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have had a different focus. I think Republicans generally tend to talk about businesses instead of employees. They tend to talk about entrepreneurs. I'm all for entrepreneurs, so is Donald Trump. But most people aren't going to work for themselves. They're going to work for somebody. The Republican Party has all too often looked like the party that reminds people of their bosses instead of a party that reminds them of the people they work next to every day. I think Ronald Reagan got that. That's why a lot of blue-collar workers went with him. So I think what Trump is doing right now is very consistent with the Reagan vision of what the Republican Party should be. And given the populist times we're living in, and also the times we're living in as far as the threat from radical Islam, that he's the candidate that I believe Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan could learn a lot from, and they probably could teach him a lot about some of the things that they're more adept at.
Gary, he's running on a populist, I would say, even nationalist message, yet in his economic plan, the only people getting tax breaks, there's a 3 or 4% tax break for the rich, nothing for the middle class, and a 35 down to 15 for businesses. So tell me how that syncs with this establishment versus the little guy, work for the little guy.
Well, I disagree with your analysis of that tax plan. I mean, first of all, there's significant savings for people making all the way up to $100,000 and people making, I think it's $35,000 and below. There's no tax liability at all. Plus, he did something that I suspect my friends at the Wall Street Journal hated, which was to do a major change, a major increase in the tax credit you can get for child care expenses. I remember when Ronald Reagan did something similar, and the Wall Street Journal wrote editorial after editorial against it. But I think Trump understands that there's lots of different ways to invest in America. You can invest in stock. That's an obvious way. Or you can look at the investment that parents make when they're raising their kids. And that's what he tried to do in putting that new provision in. So I think it's a much better middle-class approach, quite frankly, than what Hillary Clinton is talking about.
Gary, we're cutting us off here.
Will require
Gary, we appreciate it.
everybody.
Thank you for coming up. We had the Trump Tower and Katie Kerr.
You might be one of them, actually, because I understand where you come from pretty much. But although you're impossible to totally figure, Steve, I must also say that to your listeners. Anybody that thinks where you totally come from, they're making a big mistake, all right?
That was Donald Trump speaking with Steve Bannon on the Breitbart Daily radio program from May. Trump staffers come and go, but NBC News correspondent Katie Kerr is forever. She's always at Trump Tower, at least often at Trump Tower. She's joining us from there now. And in Washington, D.C., the national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek, Josh Green, whose cover story on Steve Bannon ran in October of 2015, and it called him the most dangerous political operative. And the Trump campaign has been touting that. You both know a lot, so let's go quick here. Katie, you've got a piece up on the site now with some of your colleagues. Trump often says he makes decisions with his head and with his gut and instinct. Was this decision to bring in these two new people something do you think was rational and thoughtful, or more gut instinct?
I want to say this is more of a gut decision from Donald Trump, but if you look at the polling, he is down. He hasn't been comfortable with Paul Manafort. He hasn't been comfortable trying to pivot, run a more traditional campaign. Sources within the campaign telling us that he's been deeply unhappy now for some time, and now he is realizing, in their words, that trusting his gut, embracing his own instincts is the right way to go. They feel very strongly, and Trump feels very strongly, that the way that he ran during the primaries, beating out those 16 candidates, was the right way to go. Trusting his gut, going out there, shooting from the hip, making headlines, and refusing to apologize. In the past couple months, since Corey Lewandowski left and Paul Manafort took on some more power, they've tried to traditionalize and professionalize this campaign, and you've seen Donald Trump chafe at that, trying to be conciliatory with the Republican Party. He had to read from notes the other day. Remember when he was forced to endorse Paul Ryan and John McCain and Kelly Ayotte? That didn't seem like a comfortable moment for him. And now bringing on Kellyanne Conway, who's been a long-time friend and advisor, even helped him on a potential, or looking into a potential run for governor of New York, and Steve Bannon, who's been very anti-establishment. Bringing those two on is a real indication that Donald Trump is going to be going back to just doing it his way and not listening to anyone who's telling him to change.
Josh, everybody should read your piece on Bannon. It's an incredible insight into a guy who's now at the top of the Trump power structure. People think of him as Breitbart, and that's about clicks and about, pretty provocative and sometimes more than that. But he also has been very sophisticated, as your piece makes clear, in taking opposition research and getting it into the mainstream media. Talk about Bannon as a strategist who understands the media and political ecosystem.
Well, he's an interesting guy, and Bannon has a diagnosis of why conservatives failed to stop Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and that diagnosis is they went too far. They sort of jumped over the cliff, pursuing all these rumors about Vince Foster's murder or what have you, and the mainstream media and independent voters tuned them out. So Bannon's view basically is that Hillary Clinton is attackable, but only if you focus on facts and things that matter. So Bannon was the head of the nonprofit that put out the Clinton Cash book last year, detailing all the financial transactions between various foreign entities and the Clinton Foundation, which wound up as a front-page New York Times story. And I think what you saw was the strategy play out where Bannon understands that if you can dig up real facts about Clinton that will drive down her honesty and her trustworthy numbers, and you present those to investigative reporters, if there's news there, they'll publish it in the mainstream media, and that's what we saw happen last year.
Hey, Josh, your piece was great. You admiringly compared Bannon to Leni Riefenstahl. Who?
No, not me. No, I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Andrew Breitbart, said that Steve Bannon was the Leni Riefenstahl of the Tea Party movement. But Bannon also being a filmmaker who did a documentary on Sarah Palin.
Okay. Katie, did you see, were there any early seeds of this that you saw over the last few days where this wasn't a surprise?
Of this, and certainly those inside the campaign heard of rumblings, but the staff didn't find out about this change, I'm told, until this morning. The rumblings that we heard from behind the scenes were that things were not going well between Donald Trump and Paul Manafort, that there was real tension there, that Trump was unhappy that Manafort wasn't as involved as he wanted him to be, maybe unhappy that Manafort wasn't around Trump Tower on the weekends and instead at his home. So there's been talk of whether Manafort would walk or be pushed out for now quite some time. It's important to note that Manafort has not been officially pushed out. He was today at the Roundtable on Terror here at Trump Tower. I'm told by everybody that he's going to be staying on. But this is a layering, if you will, or diluting of his influence between Donald Trump or of Donald Trump. It's more of an indication that Manafort, if anything, will be talking to folks in Washington and on the Hill where he's been effective, and letting Kellyanne Conway travel with Trump and Bannon influence what's going on here in New York.
Josh, what kind of guy is Bannon? What kind of adjectives would you apply to him? What's his demeanor like? He's had so many different jobs that you wouldn't necessarily associate together. What's he like?
He is a true Washington character. He is a wild man with a lunatic charisma, very aggressive. You can see why Trump likes him, wears his passions on his sleeves, is all about aggressive anti-establishment attacks. Breitbart, under Bannon's leadership, was the outfit that really helped, I think, push out House Speaker John Boehner, and has been as critical of his successor, Paul Ryan, as they were of Boehner. So this is a guy who is absolutely anti-RNC, anti-Washington establishment, and is going to foster those impulses in Trump, which I think Trump really wants somebody in his ear telling him to do those sorts of things. And I think that's why Bannon was brought in.
Katie, put up your poker face. What do you think of the phrase lunatic charisma?
I think that's an interesting phrase.
Katie, before we go, has life changed since you've been dubbed a swan? I mean, do people stop you on the street and try and feed you? I mean, how has life changed?
I don't even know how to answer that, Donnie. How do I answer that? Yes.
Just say shut up, Donnie. That's what you say. That's what most people say to me.
Change dramatically.
Shush.
All right, Katie
Shush.
Tur outside Trump Tower, tracking it all. We didn't get to the intelligence briefing, but we're going to talk about that probably tomorrow. And Josh Green in Washington. Again, Josh's great piece. You should read it if you want to understand Mr. Bannon. Up next, we're going to talk about how the Clinton campaign has responded to all these rumors about her health. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio. It's at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Basil Smikle, a Democratic strategist, executive director of New York State Democratic Party, and former advisor Hillary Clinton, and Patrick Griffin, a Republican media strategist and consultant. Guys, thanks for coming in. Patrick, I want to start with you. Obviously, big day, big shakeup. New message for Trump. I had a theory. It's just simply better, but a repackaging of the Muslim ban and the wall. Mark is a little bit more bullish on us. Kind of break it down. What do you think about it?
Well, look, something had to happen, Donnie, right? I mean, we were in a place where this was a death spiral. I think what's happened is Trump is going where he's most comfortable. This is what he likes to be. This is how he feels he got here. So this is a change. Here's the good news. They've gone for the deft, nuanced touch of Steve Bannon, who comes from the Breitbart world. So I think we pretty much know if you thought Trump was a little aggressive and a little unnuanced before, you're going to love the final 80-so days of this campaign.
Basil, you know they're nervous down in Brooklyn. I don't care what because you know what you got a bunch of animals coming in here now. I mean, these guys are serious. They play dirty. They play low. They play hard. So I don't think the the Clinton camp woke up this morning and liked that news. Thoughts?
Well, I don't know. Well, like is I don't know if I'd use that word.
Well, thought it was good news for them.
No, but I don't even say that. I would just say it's alarming. That's the word I would use because, he comes from a publication and he's used language that is anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, very dismissive of women's issues. So this is something that I think the Hillary campaign, like the news or not, I think this is something that they're going to certainly be talking about and addressing. But I sort of agree, and I agree with your earlier reporting, which says, Donald Trump is probably sitting around wondering why whatever it took for him to get through his primary isn't working now. And my sense is that this is a doubling down of everything that he did in a primary. And I think we're going to see more of it. To me, it's going to be more hateful, more bigoted. And that's just not who we are as a country. And that's what I think is alarming about this move.
Ask you first about the Clinton campaign's decision last night after weeks of Republicans spreading rumors about her health, putting out a pretty long statement, hitting back at Trump, but also, trying to make the case that there's nothing wrong with their health. What's the logic of responding to something like that? Doesn't that just give it more coverage, more currency?
I don't know if it gives it more currency in this instance because I also think it's a little sexist. I'd really love to know the comparison between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in terms of campaign miles logged. She works incredibly hard. When we had the primary here in New York, and I've watched her across the country, I mean, I've never seen anybody that works as hard as she does. So to talk about someone's health in the way that he is and the way that Republicans are, not only I think is dismissive of her as a candidate, but I actually think there's a hint of sexism there as well.
Pat, you've got your party looking to win this race at times, it seems, on Benghazi, rumored concussions, etc. Is that useful to at least inspire the base, or is it a distraction from a winning message?
Well, look, for Donald Trump to come after Hillary Clinton because of her health, this is a guy on the Kentucky Fried Chicken diet. I'm not sure that says much about longevity. But look, Mark, we should be hitting, the Republicans should be talking about Hillary Clinton in context and defining this campaign for what she is and isn't. She is a terrible candidate. She is a retread from the past. Democrats are not known for that. Democrats are the party about what's next. They have nominated a candidate who comes from the way, way back machine. It seems to me that Trump should be talking about the economy. He should be talking about Hillary Clinton's failures at the State Department. He should be defining this race in terms of this. I'm here because I'm not a politician. If you want someone to break furniture in Washington, that's what I'm going to do. That's why I got here.
Well, I would push back certainly on the retread issue. The Democratic Party is a party that is progressive and has been progressive for at least a generation, which is what brought me into the party. We've elected the first African-American president. We're about to elect the first woman to be president of the United States. That's progressive. That's not retread in my mind. And I think what's reflective, look, we can't sit on our haunches here. I think we still have to work really hard in this campaign for the 80-plus days that are left. But if you start to look at some of the polls and some of the separation that you're seeing, I think the messaging, the progressive messaging, the fight for 15, the paid family leave, those are things that I think are speaking to Americans today. So it's not a retread. To me, this is still a very new, fresh candidate.
But one thing, Basil, the only thing I would say to that is, look, Hillary Clinton's been in Washington longer than the monument, okay? The fact of the matter is, this is not about progressive or conservative. I think those are base voters, right? You're going to have a certain amount of people in each party who come out and vote in this thing. There's about 4% of the electorate that could have its mind changed, and right now Trump's doing nothing to expand his world to those voters. So
that's right.
I think my point is only that Hillary Clinton is a weak candidate. Were she someone else, she would be even further ahead of Trump.
But I would also argue about exactly that point about presidential campaigns and them being about growth. She has been able to grow her base of support, not just to independents, but also actually I think to Republicans. And that to me, and whereas I think his support has been hemorrhaging. So I do think there's growth there.
I want to ask you both one of my favorite litmus test questions these days. Do you trust Donald Trump controlling nuclear weapons? Yes or no?
That's a yes.
Can I phone a friend?
Do you trust him controlling nuclear weapons? Yes or no? Are you comfortable with Donald Trump controlling nuclear weapons? No.
That's the election.
Did Hillary Clinton live up to her responsibilities as Secretary of State under the Freedom of Information Act to preserve records?
Yes, she did.
She did? Explain how she did that.
Well, look, she's turned over all of the emails that were required, even in this.
If I had filed a Freedom of Information Act request over the last 2 years before she belatedly handed over some of the work emails, they wouldn't have been able to respond fully.
But she did hand over the emails that she was required to hand over, number one. And number two,
well, no, she didn't. Some of them were found other ways. She created a system after the fact in an ad hoc way, said the emails were carefully gone through, and the FBI found many emails that she failed to turn over that would have been responsive to government, would have been included as part of government records.
And if the FBI, including with the notes that they're about to hand over to Congress or have already handed over to Congress, wanted to put that information out there,
but how can you say she lived up to her responsibility?
I think she has. I think she has.
This litmus test is the election, because even if he answered the way you wanted to versus that answer, you're voting against that.
A few memos versus nukes?
Exactly. That is it, right? And by the way, he mushed it, which that is anyway. But even if he gave you the answer that you think you should have gotten from that answer pushes people to over there. Guys, we got to take a break. Guys, Patrick, thank you so much. Basil, thank you guys so much. You guys take it outside, okay? When we come back, we'll give you a very special McLaughlin goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
May seem a bit odd to say this on cable news, but there was a time when political opinion shows did not saturate the TV airways. We've been thinking about this since the passing of John McLaughlin, the host whose McLaughlin Group changed the way politics is talked about on television. Before the McLaughlin Group, shows about politics were more reportage than debate, often formal, very serious, often scripted or rehearsed. When the McLaughlin Group came on the air, suddenly political writers found a place to throw sharp elbows at and with each other and wrestle often zestily with the issues of the day. McLaughlin Group was a very coveted platform and a reliable place for fresh faces.
Issue 1. The 4 white Los Angeles police officers charged with the videotape beating of Rodney King were found not guilty this week by a jury of 12. Was the jury verdict of acquittal a just verdict? Freddie Bonds.
Let me say one other thing first. For heaven's sakes, why didn't those reporters in the helicopter go down and help that guy who was being killed, an innocent victim on the street? Boy, that may be great reporting, but it is certainly inhumane.
How do you land
wait a
a
minute,
helicopter
wait a minute.
in the middle of a busy street?
You go right down. It's pretty easy. You go down and land. There wasn't a lot of traffic there. They could have saved that life.
Can we address the question of the candidate or now the winner of the
candidate's
speech?
a good candidate. Excuse me. The Klansman is a good candidate.
What?
I'll tell you why.
What? Wait a minute.
Here's why. Let me tell you why. When all the cameras came down there, he said he apologized for wearing that Nazi uniform when he was 17. He talked about taxes. He talked about racial set-asides. He talked about crime. When all the cameras were on,
wait a minute.
They made the guy a martyr.
Yes or no answer. Did Lee Atwater play it smart? Yes or no?
Afraid so.
What do you say?
No, I think he had to do what he did.
What do you say?
And I think it was pretty smart, too.
I think it was smart, too. The answer is he was smart.
Bill Clinton is sequestered in the governor's mansion in Little Rock this weekend. He's trying to figure out whom to pick as his running mate. Who should be dropped from this list and dropped right away?
I think the only name that belongs on the list anymore is Bradley, and this is so ironic. Here we have 2 guys in the government who have gone up this week, Kemp and Bradley, the only 2 guys who work professionally with black Americans through a big part of their career as inferiors or peers at best. That's in professional sports. Bradley's going up through the roof because he played for the Knicks, not because he's a U.S. senator. That's the great irony of this disaster.
So you saw the beginning there, the regulars, Clift, Germond, Buchanan, Barnes, Kondracki, and then Chris Matthews there, our colleague. Christopher Matthews. So they did rotate new people, but a big part of it was people you saw pretty much every week on a rotating basis who were willing to talk the way you talk in a bar or at a dinner or in a newsroom, and that was a revelation.
We talked about how this is basically the precursor to everything that is kind of cable news or political news today, but they did it better. What you noticed there in those clips were there was tremendous conflict, but it wasn't angry. You got a sense they liked each other. And I don't know if TV has gotten that right today. We've got straight shooting, and then we have a lot of kind of yelling at each other, where that was incredibly animated. But you got a sense those characters liked each other.
And you saw occasionally a little bit of a wink and the laugh.
That's my point.
And obviously it was at a time when in Washington, Democrats and Republicans hung out more together. There was far less of the polarization and partisanship. But that level of speed, that level of acknowledging the fourth wall, of acknowledging kind of the dirty of politics and the ironies of politics, that just didn't exist on television before that. And they so stood out. Try to explain this to young people. No cable shows. The broadcast shows were the Sunday morning shows that were genteel and straightforward. That show stood out as something that everyone in Washington watched and talked about, and people around the country interested in national politics.
Okay. For those of us who watch the McLaughlin Group in its entirety, we look forward to something new at the conclusion of each episode, the branded segment. McLaughlin called it simply Predictions.
Predictions. Next candidate to have some trouble in the U.S. Senate on confirmation, Larry Eagleburger, and they'll be getting into all the clients of Kissinger Associates.
Within weeks, Delaware will authorize public flogging for drug trafficking.
Dianne Feinstein will win the Democratic gubernatorial primary in California.
Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas had a very weak primary showing. It's going to have a squeaker for re-election.
As Schwarzenegger does win, he will not be re-elected.
The nation is beginning to sour on globalization and will incline towards a neo-isolationism, but narrowly miss it. Bye-bye.
I like the slick back Lawrence O'Donnell. You know, it brought a little ESPN Sports Center quality to covering political. It could be fun. You could game it, if you will, but still do intelligent stuff. And you brought characters, critters. We created today, we have a lot of news critters on TV. This was the introduction of the political news critter.
Nobody turned off the McLaughlin Group before it ended because you had to watch predictions. It was the best, I think the most sort of like thoroughly must-watch branded segment in the history of political television. They all week, they all worried, did they have the greatest prediction? And the other thing about that segment was it was competitive. They all wanted to have like the prediction people talk about. And remember, there was no internet. I can go on my Twitter feed now and read 1,000 predictions.
Okay, real quick, as an homage, as a tribute to McLaughlin, any prediction for the next few weeks?
I predict that Corey Lewandowski will continue to say things on CNN about the Trump campaign that will be fascinating.
I think Trump will continue to go south, but I think we might get some surprises after Labor Day. I actually believe it's some of the stuff might stick.
That program, the McLaughlin Group, has gone down and will go down in TV history and journalism history, and glad we got to revisit a little bit more tonight. We'll be right back. We might have an hour, but some stuff we didn't get to in this program today. Hillary Clinton met with Paul McCartney privately today. They were both in Cleveland. And Donald Trump had his first national security briefing as the Republican nominee.
Some people have been frightened that the same way he gets up in speeches and says, I've heard, or people have said, is that going to now come from the pages of the intelligence briefing?
Something we watch closely. You can head to BloombergPolitics.com right now and see what investors had to say about Donald Trump in our new Bloomberg Politics poll. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, on Bloomberg West, the so-called godfather of the internet, Google's chief internet evangelist, Vint Cerf.
Cool name.
Until tomorrow, Donnie, I'll be back here, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Hillary Clinton campaigned in Cleveland, Ohio today. One of the topics, gun control. Clinton tried to reassure gun owners that if she becomes president, the Second Amendment won't come under attack.
I am not at all advocating any program that would in any way take people's guns away. Here's what I'm advocating. I want to help you stay alive so that nobody who shouldn't have